For part C, they told us that we have a 0. We have a 0 at 2 that has a multiplicity of 1. We have a 0 of 1 that has a multiplicity of 2. So that tells me it's squared. And then we have this one, which is a 3i. So let's do the easy ones first. If you have a 0 at positive 2, what does that mean your factor is going to be? X minus 2. And then I also have a 0 at 1. So that would be x minus 1. But because it says it's squared, I have to put an exponent of 2 on the outside of that factor. So that factor is squared. Now it's the 3i. Does anyone know what factor is going to give me a solution of 3i?
Is it -3?
No. I'm asking this question. I mean, you know, it's just, if anybody know it, I'll be really super impressed. But
Somebody said it was square root.
you actually kind of close-ish. All right, so let me just give you the factor, and then I'll explain why it is. It is actually x squared plus 9. So let's go ahead and take the x squared plus 9. I want you to solve this to the side. Take x squared plus 9 and solve that for x and see if you can understand why we get 3i. How would you solve x squared plus 9? What would be your first step? So we did that part. And then after you set it equal to 0, what would you do? Subtract 9. And then what would you do to get rid of that square? Square root it. So I think we had this in appendix 6. So we would have x equals the square root of -9. And then we would say, oh, you can't take the square root of a negative. So we would take out the -1. And we know the square root of -1 is what? That's where we get the I. And what's the square root of 9? 3. So we get the 3i. So the hard part of this is we have to now multiply this out. So just be prepared, brace yourself, because we got a lot of boxes we're about to make. It's a lot. So we have, what we have here is we have x minus 2. And that's multiplied by x minus 1, x minus 1. And then we also have x squared plus 9. So which 2 do you want to multiply first? All right, so I heard Karma. She says she wants to multiply these 2. Let's go ahead and multiply those 2. Make a box, multiply x minus 1 times x minus 1. So I'm not going to show my work. So I want you all to make a box. Multiply x minus 1 times x minus 1. You have to make a box to do that. Fill in your 4 squares. Combine your like terms. All right, now we're going to multiply. So who got x squared minus 2x plus 1? All right, good. So now let's make a box and multiply. I'm going to multiply these 2 together. So for that one, I actually do have to make a box and show my work. I could square 2 binomials in my head, but I can't do a binomial and a trinomial. So I'm going to go ahead and make my little boxy box. Go ahead and fill in all 6 squares. So we got x to the third. Let me take a moment, make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay. Now we're going to combine our like terms, so these two and these two. So that's going to give us x cubed minus 4x squared plus 5x minus 2. And then we have to multiply that by x squared plus 9. So we're going to make one more box. And this time my box is going to be even bigger. You definitely don't want to rush through this question on the test. Go ahead and fill in all 8 squares, and then you'll be done. Good looking out, Sam. I was about to mess up my whole box. That's an x cubed. And that's an x squared. Okay, that's the kind of mistakes that'll cost me all my points on my test. You just saved my A. X cubed minus 4x squared plus 5x minus 2. Okay, yep. So now fill in all 8 squares. Okay, let me take a moment, make sure I didn't drop the ball anywhere. So we got x to the 5th, negative 4x to the 4th, 5x cubed, negative 2x squared in the bottom row. Okay, so now we're going to look for like terms. So I see that I have these two x cubes. They can be added together. And I have these 2x squared. Everybody else doesn't have a friend. So my final answer would be y equals x to the 5th minus 4x to the 4th plus 14x cubed minus 38x squared plus 45x minus 18. And that is a big one. Pretty sure on the test we won't give you a 5th degree. That's a lot to have you write a 5th degree in center form, but at least you'll know. But what I do want to talk about, because this is going to come back up, if let's say in the homework it says you have a 0 of 2i, what would my factor be? Keeping that it always starts with an x squared plus. Whenever it's an imaginary, it starts with x squared plus. So that would be x squared plus 4. You see the pattern here? So if I said that the 0 was negative 5i, somebody else besides Karma, be x squared plus 25. So the key is that it has to be an x squared and it has to be a plus in order for you to get the imaginary.
So it doesn't matter if it's negative or not, it's still
Yep, doesn't matter if it's positive or negative. We're actually going to talk about that. It's impossible to have, if you have a 3i, there's also a negative 3i. So when we go back to this one that we solved here, I didn't finish it. But the answer would be x equals plus and minus 3i. Imaginaries always roll with a friend. You can't have a 3i without a negative 3i. You can't have a 5i without a negative 5i. They always have a partner.
So if it's the I, it's called imaginary.
It's imaginary. All right, so let me go back here. Any questions about that? All right, so now let's go ahead and glue down example 7. And we're going to write our equations. We're going to write our equations for these graphs. Thank you. Thank you. So for example 7, we're going to skip over 6. We're skipping over 6 and going to 7. Oh, I'm sorry, what was your question? Oh, okay. So go ahead and glue down 7 because 6 and 7 go together. So we might as well just skip 6 and go right to 7. There should be some glue sticks. There's some by the window too. If you don't have one on your desk, there's some by the window. So we went from homework 11, we skipped over 12. So homework 13, after this question, you should be able to do all of homework 13, which is from the book. Homework 14, you should be finished with. I also cut another homework that was out of the book. So it's updated on Canvas. So basically, I cut out 2 homework assignments because we really don't have time to go through that. So I cut out 1 more homework assignment. So we are skipping over some numbers, but it's okay. I have no idea, ma'am. Check Canvas.
It was 12.
No, we skipped over 12. We did not have homework 12.
Okay. Was it 13 due today then?
Ma'am, you need to check Canvas.
13 is due tomorrow.
I wish I could say I could remember, but it's really hard. Oh, it's up on the board. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Karma. I forgot I wrote that up there.
It should be swapped. 14 is easier than 13.
But it's not, so. But you all get an extra day. 14 is a worksheet. Here you go. You had this too. In the second period. That's great. I was making sure because one is integrated, the other one is PreCal. So I was making sure you all had the right one.
Is my book? I'm just using one homework now.
All right, so we're going to write an equation for these 2 graphs. So first question first, is this an even? Let's look at A. Is it even or odd?
Even.
Even. How do we know it's even?
Those arrows are
Yeah, we got 2 arrows pointed up. Now, also, I want you to notice that this says factor form, which is way easier than standard form. So that means we don't have to multiply it out. We just need to write it as factors, which is a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is zoom in to my x-axis. So I have here, I have 3 x-intercepts. Would you agree there's 3? My first x-intercept is at x equals -4. And it's going through. So because it goes through, that means the multiplicity on the factor is 1. So So my first factor that I'm going to write, if I have a 0, so I have y equals, and let's put the letter A because we're going to come back and figure out what A is later. That's my leading coefficient. So if I have a 0 at -4, that means my factor is x plus 4. My second 0 is at -1. But notice that it doesn't go through the x-axis. It bounces off, which tells me what about my factor? Multiplicity is 2. Good. So my factor, if it goes through, if it touches at -1, I'm going to write the factor of x plus 1, and I have to square that. That factor is squared. And then lastly, I have a 0 here, and that's at x equals 3. Does it go through at the 3, or does it bounce off the 3? Goes through. So that is just going to be an x minus 3. We don't have to square it. So now we need to find A. To find A, that's why they give us this point right here. We're simply going to substitute that into our equation. So I'm going to substitute in, let's start off with the 1. I'm going to put a 1 every place where I have an x. I'm going to put a 1. And then I'm going to put my -8 right here and solve that for A. So that is going to give me -8 equals A. And then I have 1 plus 4, and then 1 plus 1 squared, and 1 minus 3. So you can actually take your calculator and type this whole thing in there in one swoop. It's not going through, it's like touching it and bouncing off of the axis. Off the x-axis. So what is that? I think if I remember right, it's 40. Is it -40? Who got -40? Okay. So we have -8 equals A times -40. So what would be my last step to solve for A? Because that A is being multiplied by -40. Divide both sides by -40. These are being multiplied. You can also write it, if that looks weird, you could write it as -8 equals -40A. If having it behind it looks weird, then put it in front. But regardless, you should get A equals 1/5. Or you could say 0.2. Now, we knew that it was even. Do we think that our leading coefficient should be positive or negative based off where the arrows is going? Positive. So that 1/5 sounds legit. It looks legit. So my equation, my final equation is, I'm just going to take that 1/5. I'm going to rewrite what I wrote right here and put my 1/5 in for A. So my equation would be y equals 1/5 times x plus 4 times x plus 1 squared times x minus 3. And that would be your final solution, yes. The multiplicity is 2, or the exponent is, or the factor is squared. It's 1. It's either 1 or 2.
Will we always be given a closed point to use for?
Yep, you'll always be given a closed point, yep. So let's go ahead and start on graph B. For graph B, is this one even or odd? Odd. So we know this is odd, and this arrow tells me if it's a positive or a negative. So because the right side goes up, I know that it's positive. All right, so let's go ahead and focus in on my x-axis. So I have 1, 2, 3, I have 4 factors. So we have y equals, and then a, which we'll find at the end. And I have to make 4 factors. So my first factor, now this graph, you got to look at it and figure out how it's scaled. But this graph is counting by a half. So this is actually -1 and this is -3. So my first 0 is at -3, which means my factor would be x plus 3. Do you think that x plus 3 factor is that to the power of 1, or is it going to be squared? 1, because it's going through. My second factor is x plus 1. Is that going to be to the power of 1, or is it going to be squared?
1.
Going through 1. You got to look really closely. It does go through at the 1. See how the blue is at the top and bottom? But here at 0, it doesn't go through. So there is no such thing as x plus 0 or x minus 0. Whenever you have a x-intercept at the origin, we just say x. That one is squared. And then my last factor, which is +2, that's going to be x minus 2. So they gave you a point. The point they gave you is -2.
X minus 2 squared, right?
The x minus 2. So here, does it go through?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, so it's a 1.
So it's a 1.
Okay.
All right, so now we're going to use this point that they gave us to find a. So we're going to substitute in this x value. You're going to substitute it here, 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 and here. And then your y value, you're going to substitute in here. Go ahead and find a. Go ahead and type that in your calculator. I think you should get a equals 1. But when you type that in the calculator, you should get 16. So you have 16 equals a times 16. Divide 16 by 16 and a equals 1. So I'm just going to rewrite my equation. In my equation, my final answer would be y equals, if a is 1, you don't have to write it, but I'm going to write it. And then you have x plus 3, x plus 1, the x squared, and the x minus 2. All right, any questions? So now we're gonna start 4.6. So now we finished all of homework 13.
What about doing it backwards?
You mean example 6? Wait, what do you mean doing it backwards?
There were 2 questions on homework 13 where they give you things that you need to put on the graph and you need to graph it. So they give you your zeros, your end behavior, and your.
Oh, and then you have to kind of put the pieces together.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So we should be able to.
you should. If not, we can do that at the beginning of class tomorrow or in the class. All right, let's look at 4.6. It's got a little hot all of a sudden. If you're titling your notes, if not, but this is 4.6, which is the real zeros of a function. We're just going to do a couple of the easy questions today, and then we'll get into a little bit more of the complicated stuff tomorrow. But I will dedicate some time. We have some time that I can go over some homework 13 questions at the beginning of class, or a homework 13 question, I should say. So 4.6 is the real zeros of a function. So we're all talking about different things from a polynomial. We're talking about the end behavior, the zeros, writing the equation in standard form, in factor form, multiplicity. So now we're going to talk about the remainder theorem, which you do not need to write down that specific theorem. I mean, that's really not useful to you. So what I would write down is just example 1. And I'm going to talk about, first of all, do you know what a remainder is? If you divide something by if you divide a number by a number, what is the remainder? Yeah, so for example, if I said 3 goes into 20, what would be my remainder? 2. Because 3 can go up to 20 6 times. 2 is what's left over. And that's what, when we say find the remainder, I'm asking for what is left over when I divide x cubed minus 4x squared minus 5 by x minus 3. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We're not dividing today. We will be dividing, but we're not dividing today. So to find the remainder is actually very simple, because the theorem says if you take f of x and you divide it by x minus c, the remainder is just f of c. So if I'm dividing by x minus 3, my remainder is just going to be f of what? F of 3. F of 3 is my remainder. How did I get the 3? Just in case you all didn't get that. You take the x minus 3, you take your factor that you're dividing it by. You set that equal to 0 to get that actual number. And this is what we are going to substitute in. So what I want you to do with your calculator, so this is all calculator work. Pick up your calculator. You're going to type in 3 to the power of 3 minus 4 times 3 squared minus 5. Yeah, we're just finding the remainder today, because that's pretty easy. So today we're just talking about the remainder theorem. Did you get negative 14? Okay. I was trying to remember, see if I remembered it from first period. All right, what do you think I'm going to substitute in for x plus 2? What am I going to find? F of what? Negative 2. So when you plug in a negative, it's really important that you use those parentheses that are on your calculator. Parentheses are really important when you have a negative. That's the only way you can miss this on the test, is if you don't use your calculator right. Go ahead and substitute that in. -8. Is it -30?
-20.
I was close. Who got -29? So that's the remainder. I want to emphasize that. This is not the quotient. This is not the dividend. This is not what we get. This is the remainder. It's the remainder. So I want you to do the next one by yourself. So I'm giving you a different function, and I want you to find the remainder of these two. Same thing, find the remainder, and then that's it for today. What are you going to substitute in for part A? Yep. So you got to put it to the power of 4. Make sure you're using your parentheses. I know for the first one you get a big number. I want to say -140. Positive 140. Who got positive 140? Positive 130. Who got a positive 130? Okay. Sorry, I was trying to go off memory from first period. All right, so it's 130. And so that would be your remainder. So that's your final answer. It's all calculator work. But for part B, you should get 0. Who got 0? So what does that mean, though, when you get a remainder of 0? It's divisible, which means it's a factor. Yeah, so that means that x plus 1 is a factor. If we were to put this in factored form, one of my factors would be x plus 1. X plus 3 is not a factor here. But x plus 1 is a factor, and that's why my remainder is 0. All right, we're going to end there and pick up here tomorrow.